Right, and that's so. There are fundamentals that, in order to reason, in order to function in a coherent way in the universe, there are certain kind of fundamentals that just have to be fundamentals, presuppositions, whatever you want to call them. But if you flip it up and you try to keep making, make the main level of the house the foundation's, it's all going to fall apart.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, Ben, since we got you here, we're Christians. You're this Orthodox Jew. I want to know, so what do you make of Jesus Christ? Who is he? And what is your evaluation of Jesus?
Okay. So my belief is, and this is a fairly typical Judaic view of Jesus, is that Jesus was, and I mean, keep in mind, I don't believe in Jesus as Lord because I'm a Jew. So the Jewish view of Jesus.
We got you. You're safe. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
I'm not going to stone you yet.
Right? Like I'm good with the prequel. It's the sequel where we differ. So my view of Jesus is that Jesus was in all likelihood an Orthodox Jew. He even the New Testament talks about him being an Orthodox Jew. He's an Orthodox Jew who knew how to practice Judaism and tried to lead a political revolt against the Romans and was crucified for his trouble. Yeah. Because most of the stuff that I see in the New Testament that I think is foundational to the New Testament is in some cases a plain restatement of what's in the Old Testament. Right. Obviously, the two documents are inherently connected.
Jesus said he was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Maybe another way to flip it around would be the question. So Jesus claimed to be Messiah.
Right.
The Torah and the Old Testament all promise a coming Messiah. What about Jesus do you find uncompelling? What about Jesus do you find uncompelling to his claims to be Christ?
Right. So the concept of the Messiah in Christianity is very different from the concept of the Messiah in Judaism. So the Messiah in Judaism is essentially a political figure. The Messiah in Judaism is a guy who comes along and restores the Davidic monarchy and brings the Jews back to Israel and restores Jews to practice. There's like Maimonides lays out like a whole series of things that somebody has to do in order to be considered the Messiah. The concept of the Messiah as actual embodiment of God in Judaism is anathema, right? Jews don't believe that God takes human form. They don't believe that God takes physical form.
Okay, so then he's not a good rabbi then. So he can't be a good rabbi and anathema.
Well, he as told in the New Testament, right. I mean, that's correct. I mean, if I believed that the New Testament was a factual history of Jesus, then I would say that Jesus was not a good rabbi. I, as a Jew, don't think that that's. Of course, if I thought that it was a factual history, I'd also agree with it, right? I mean,
okay.
Again, I don't see Jews do not see the New Testament as a factual, objective history of Jesus. They see it as in sort of a pastiche of Judaic ideas with ideas that come from Greece and from Gnostic religions. But that makes sense. I mean, we disagree on this. I mean,
Ben,
they're not the same religion, right?
We need about a week so you and I can just sit down with some coffee and some beer and man.
Oh yeah, it's a conversation that it's interesting to have. I have, the truth is I have more fun talking about the stuff that we have in common rather than the stuff we differ on.
Yeah, sure. But it's funner to talk about what we differ on because I want to get you saved, Ben. So,
and you know what? This is something that I've always appreciated.
So my second question is pertaining to kibbutzim. That their basic system is one based on like a microcosm of socialism.
Yes.
So I wanted to know what you thought about that pertaining to Bernie Sanders' like insane loony bin socialism.
Right. So Bernie Sanders is a nutcase, and Bernie Sanders, like this is something people say about the New Testament also, because in the New Testament, I've got my Christian hat on tonight. I mean, the New Testament has a section where it talks about Jesus sharing in common with his disciples, and so people like to quote the New Testament to the idea that Jesus was a socialist. Okay. As somebody who, first of all, the New Testament also says, he who does not work, he shall not eat, right? So there's that. But aside from that, the fact is that the kibbutz model failed. They tried it, and then they tried to expand it out, and it failed. And the reason it failed is for the same reason that socialism always failed. You can't pay a doctor the same as a janitor and expect things to go well. It'll work. Socialism works in tiny communities. You know how you know? Because you all have families, and they're basically socialist. Right? You have a common pool of wealth, and everybody draws from it. Right? My wife and I have a joint bank account. Ooh, we're socialists. Right? But the difference is I like my wife. I don't know any of you people. This idea that you can extend out what is essentially a familial system across an entire broad society and then force people to join in, and we can all be one family, even if the guy who's taking from the pot's a total schmuck who won't do a day of work, it's not going to succeed. I am so irritated with the support for Bernie Sanders, I cannot even tell you. Every time that loon bag gets up there and he says, "Life is not fair, give me money, I just want to die," it's so awful.
So just to quickly wrap up, I am a premium annual subscriber to the Daily.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate it.
Also, my mom's an Argentinian immigrant, so she wants you to talk a little bit slower because English is not her first language. So
yeah, I've been asked this about a bajillion times, and unfortunately, the brain moves too fast. I can't.
Also, a lot of people say don't meet your heroes. I think they're full of crap. I was wondering if I could shake your hand as well.
Sure, come on up.
Thank you.
#1 new vitamin.
And brilliant seg. I mean, he segues right into an ad for some sort of fusion vitamin, so that's great. This guy, by the way, is considered a leading Trump ally, Alex Jones. I don't know why! I can't understand it! Look at this! Look what's underneath here! It's another shirt! Why? Why? Because I don't want to go to the cleaners that often, that's why. Come on. Okay, so it's just, I think it says something about our country when that guy is a leading advocate for one of the president.
No, I mean, it isn't. This is actually how a lot of millennials think, and this is how the Occupy Wall Street movement thinks. This is a group of people who graduated with degrees in lesbian dance theory and then were surprised when they didn't get a six-figure paycheck out of college. I mean, this is, unfortunately, they were getting a paycheck consummate with their education level. The problem is that if you have to be productive in a capitalist society in order to earn anything. And this is, unfortunately, a lazy generation, a generation that expects things. And ignorant and communist is no way to go through life.
Most dealers are good. Gun dealers are good. Let me finish. But the NRA has all but neutered the ATF. All but neutered. And there are, well, we haven't had an ATF director for the last 10 years. We haven't had an ATF director for the last 10 years because the NRA won't even allow us to have a Surgeon General because the guy wanted common sense gun control.
Well, the ATF is a little bit busy smuggling guns south of the border to the drug cartels.
And say whether or not he should be considered someone who is a hero and inspirational to other young men out there.
Well, here's actually the problem that I have. I think that you can accept and tolerate people's behavior, and that, demonstrates non-homophobia. I think that it is ridiculous to suggest that just because you're not celebrating, on the cover of Sports Illustrated, somebody coming out of the closet, and you think, it's relatively unimportant in the grand scheme of things because people should be able to live their lives the way that they want. I don't really understand. There were folks who were saying that that was a homophobic tweet. I'm still confused as to how it's homophobic simply to say that you don't think it's a heroic move in today's America to come out of the closet the same way that it was maybe 20 years ago.
Some people making below $15 an hour make ends meet by receiving government benefits in the form of food stamps and or other subsidies. Some assert that this essentially means governments have enabled businesses to pay less and keep more for their bottom lines, resulting in subsidized corporate profits and people more dependent on government. Ben Shapiro, as a conservative who advocates for less dependency on government, why do you object to this reasoning?
I don't object to that reasoning. I think it's 100% true. I think the major problem that we have with regard to food stamps supplementing people's wages is that these companies are being paid off by the government. I mean, they're getting enormous subsidies from the federal government in the form of food stamps, and there are two ways that you can correct that in terms of wages. The first way that you can correct that in terms of wages would be with a measure like the minimum wage, which, as we'll argue about tonight, decreases, in my opinion, employment. The evidence, I believe, tends to show that it decreases employment, or at the very least puts a cap on it and makes it more difficult for small businesses to operate while big businesses are still getting these subsidies. And second of all, it creates a corrupt system where certain businesses benefit more than others. The second way that you're going to be able to prevent all of this is if you cut back a lot of these subsidies, forcing businesses to compete for labor. Labor is just like any other good in a free market. That means that people have to compete for it. So if you want wages to go up, then get rid of the government paying the other half of the wage, and you will see the wages automatically increase. I think that we should all be able to agree on the idea that wages need to increase. I think the difference is that the way to make wages increase is to have a fully consensual relationship between employer and employee. And I think this is really the root of the morality of minimum wage when it comes down to it. And in two sentences here is that I would never force an employee to work for an employer at a given wage. That violates the 13th Amendment.